This happened when I was 18, making the road trip from my hometown to my new college. I had all my stuff shoved into the trunk and back seat of my cheap SUV. This was not only my first long road trip alone, but also going to be my first time being away from my family for an extended amount of time, so my nerves were reasonably high. Anyway, the directions I was taking said it was 600 miles total, which I split into 2 days of driving. I was taking whatever route the maps had me take, and it estimated I'd make it to the hotel at 11 p.m. But with possible traffic, gas stops, and getting food, I knew I'd likely get there much later. By 7, the sun was fully gone, and most of the cars were gone too. Every once in a while, a car would pass by, and I'd see their headlights slowly fade out in front of me. But for most of the drive, it was just me. This actually made me really tired and bored. Around Tenbury, I decided I'd stop at the next gas station before making the final stretch of the drive. About 10 minutes later, I exited the road and entered a gas station. Being so far out, this wasn't a town or anything. It was literally just a gas station with a few pumps and a tiny convenience store. I didn't see any other cars on the road or in the lot, and not even any lights from any nearby houses or buildings in the distance. I pulled right up to a pump and got out to start topping off my tank. As I looked around, I almost got jump scared by a guy walking up to me. In comparison to myself, he was much older, probably in his 50s if I had to guess, and he honestly looked homeless. Regardless, being approached out here wasn't something I was expecting, and his short smile didn't make me feel any more comfortable. "Do you need something?" I said, hoping he wouldn't walk any closer. The man stopped a few feet from my car and looked around almost cautiously before responding. "Take the exit back onto the highway." I looked at him, confused, not sure if I was understanding him right. He pointed behind me at the exit I came from and repeated, "Take the exit back onto the highway." After a second, I said, "Okay," and the man walked off, but I was still really confused. The exit I came from that he wanted me to take again was a one-way road, so by his logic, he wanted me to drive on the wrong side of the road and do a U-turn back onto the highway. It just didn't make any sense. I looked out at the entrance road, the obvious one that I was supposed to take, and there were no signs of any construction or anything blocking it. It just looked like an empty ramp back onto the highway. As I put the pump back and got in my car, I glanced over at the man who was now just sitting against the side of the convenience store. The more I thought about it, though, the crazier that man seemed just to be sitting out here saying nonsense. I thought maybe this was some kind of trap or something, so I went with my instinct and drove out of the lot and toward the entrance to the highway. As I merged onto it, though, I realized pretty much all the streetlights were out. I slowed down, thinking maybe this was a construction zone or something. I kept my eyes focused on the road directly ahead, making sure to be cautious of anything. But while I made my way through the unlit road, I saw only a brief outline of a figure to my left before a pickup truck came out of nowhere and stopped right in front of my car. Every door opened as 4 men jumped out of the truck and started running up to my car, holding weapons of all kinds, metal bats, machetes, knives, and not even anything covering their faces. They just had this emotionless gaze, like they felt nothing of what they were doing. I quickly started backing up as they got just a few feet away from my windows, and once I got far enough back, I suddenly saw the outline of dozens of people coming out of the shadows off the side of the road. A few even tried chasing my car as I frantically reversed out of there. As soon as I could, I turned around and sped off. I called 911 once I felt I was safe, but for some reason, I never got a call back, no update on it at all. Almost like they didn't even check on it. Ironically, though, it was the creepy old guy at the gas station that tried to prevent me from even getting caught up in that mess, or at least that was what I assume he was doing. Either way, I was incredibly lucky to get out of that with my life, as I have no idea what that was or what they were all planning to do. This happened during a road trip I was taking on the way back from seeing my family for the holidays. I'm not usually one to drive more than a couple of hours because I much prefer flying, but this year the tickets to where I was going were way more expensive for some reason. It would have cost me over $1,000 for a round-trip flight that only went a few states over. I had planned everything out so that I'd get home a few days before I had to go to work, but a snowstorm blew in on the day I was going to leave, so I had to stay an extra 2 days before finally starting the drive. The roads were empty since it was past the holiday rush, and most of the drive is pretty out of the way from the big cities. The hardest part of it was always staying awake and fighting the boredom. The first 8 or so hours went by without any trouble. Sure, I was tired, but the snow on the road kept me awake and attentive. It was about 10:01 p.m., and I had a hotel booked in a small town just 2 hours further ahead. But as I drove, a small light came up in my mirror. It was the headlights of someone behind me, which was actually the first person I'd seen on the road with me in over an hour. Their lights were getting bigger quickly, showing that they were coming up really fast. Soon, I could see that it was actually a large van of some kind. It was only a one-lane road, so I couldn't get out of their way. But I figured they would still swerve around me, given they were going so fast. Once they reached the back of my car, though, they matched my speed and stayed behind me. After a few seconds, I realized they weren't trying to get around me, and we drove like that for almost 10 minutes. It was kind of unnerving being that it was only us on the road, and yet this huge van was trailing right behind me. It wasn't a normal following distance either. They were so close that I couldn't even see their front bumper or license plate in my mirror. Maybe I was quick to feel uneasy about it, but an exit came up for a gas station, and I chose to turn off, hoping they would stay on the road and that I could put some distance between us. But as I veered off and down the exit ramp, they stayed right behind me. I pulled into the gas station and parked at one of the pumps as the van pulled into the pump behind me. At this point, I just didn't know what was happening. Part of me thought that this was something bad, but another part of me thought I was just overreacting. I knew that this was the only gas station in the past 30-ish minutes, so it wasn't all that unlikely that they would also need gas. Before getting out to fill up my tank, I shut my car off and looked around. The store part of the gas station had its lights off and a closed sign hanging from the door. I looked to the sides of it, seeing nothing but empty darkness. No houses, no buildings, just a field covered in snow with a single road going through it. I looked at my mirror. A man was now standing outside of the van and putting gas in, so I got out and began doing the same. As the numbers slowly ticked on the gas meter, the man quickly put his pump back and sealed his gas cap. I looked over, seeing him walking to the back of his van. Then I heard the loud ratcheting sound of the back door being lifted open. There was something in that moment, maybe a gut feeling or just an instinct of some kind, that told me to get out of there. I pulled the pump out of my car, and not even a second later, 3 men were sprinting at me from around the back of the van. I dropped the pump on the ground and quickly got in my car, locking the doors just as one of them grabbed the handle and tried to rip it open. I was shaking and moving as quickly as I could to get the car on. All 3 of them went around trying each door, but then immediately sprinted back to their van before I'd even had the chance to pull away. When I did, though, I saw them drive away soon after, going in the opposite direction down the way we had come from. I let the police know what happened, but never even got a call back with any updates. I think it's obvious they were trying to abduct people under the cover of night on the vast, unpopulated highway. What's terrifying is how confident and, for lack of a better word, professional the whole operation was. It seemed that as soon as they realized I was securely in my car and it wasn't going to be effortless, they fled the scene without even needing to communicate with each other. It was like they had done it many times before. What would have happened if they had gotten me? I don't know. But I urge everyone to learn from my mistakes, because you may not be as lucky as I was. In 2019, I did deliveries for a pizza place near my school. I'd work most days after class, so I could afford to pay for my car and rent. It wasn't a great job in any aspect, but it was good enough to get me through college without being completely broke. This night was no different than most in the beginning. I clocked in at 6 and delivered for 3 hours straight, then took a lunch break and started again at 9:30. I picked up the next order and started heading to the place. The address didn't look like a house, but the route it took me on to get there was not what I was expecting. It took me further out from town, away from most houses and stores, and into a business center. It was an area full of small office buildings and nothing else. I drove down the road and couldn't really tell what any of the addresses were, so I just followed the directions on the GPS and hoped it would take me into the right parking lot. When I turned in, I drove through a pretty long parking area until I reached the front of the building and could read the address. It matched up with the one on the order, but something was off. The parking lot was completely empty. Not even the streetlights were on, and the office building had no signs of anyone being inside. I double-checked the address, thinking there must have been a mistake, but it all checked out. I even tried searching it on Google for any places nearby with the same address, but no, this was it. I set my car in park and got out, glancing around before walking up to the door. It was a glass door with a dark tint covering it. I knocked, then took a step back and waited. It only took a moment before the door opened. It was a middle-aged man wearing very casual clothes and holding a small grin on his face. He suddenly got overly excited and said he was happy the food had finally arrived and that everyone was hungry. I looked behind him, not seeing anyone else, and only a single light on in the middle of the hallway, but I ignored it and just told him his total. He must have realized what I was looking for, though, as he quickly explained that everyone else was in the rec room on the 3rd floor for a company party. I smiled to be polite, but the man was talking with an overwhelming amount of excitement, so much so that it almost felt like he had to be faking it. He pulled out his wallet and handed me cash for the pizzas along with a $10 tip, but as I took the money, he asked me for a favor. He wanted help bringing the pizzas up to the 3rd floor. The man had put me in a strange position. Having taken the generous tip already, it felt like it would only be right to help him. On the other hand, carrying a few pizzas isn't exactly difficult, and it didn't seem necessary by any means. He started walking without me having answered yet, urging me to follow him as he made his way to a door leading to some stairs. I trailed behind, keeping my distance of following him into the stairwell. As I entered, though, I felt a cold rush of air and noticed all the lights were off. Only the small light from the hallway lit the entrance to the stairs. The man started making his way up, but stopped once he realized I hadn't continued following him. He turned and made a humorous remark about the lights, but his grin was quick to leave once he saw that I wasn't going to follow him anymore. There was no hesitation as he came rushing down toward me with anger in his eyes. I tossed the pizzas on the ground, rushing out of the door and into the hallway, then running for the exit and bolting to my car. I saw the man come partly out of the front doors before going back in and slamming them shut. I immediately called the police after driving to a different parking lot. The man had run off by the time they got there, and since he paid in cash, there was no way to know who he really was. The office building was empty, though, and there was nobody else on the 3rd floor, so it's clear that it was just some sort of trap. What he had ready for me on the 3rd floor is unknown, and I hope that nobody ever has to know. I used to deliver Chinese food for a local restaurant. I was just a teenager in high school at the time, and whatever job I got wasn't going to be for more than a year or two. I'd say this job was fairly typical to most first jobs or retail and food service jobs, because it had some slow and boring days and some busy and stressful days. As the delivery driver, though, I was always thankful not to have to be working in the store and dealing with mobs of customers. On this night, I started at 6 p.m. It was a Friday, so I was working a late 6 to 12 shift. As soon as I clocked in, I was delivering orders non-stop for the next 2 hours with no time to breathe in between them. By 8 rain, orders were slowing a bit, but I still had a few more to deliver before I could take my lunch. So I grabbed the 3 orders and set out to get them done before 9 The first one was close, but the next 2 were further out. This isn't uncommon, as our town isn't all packed together. I got to the second house and dropped it off, then headed out to the final stop. It was 10 minutes from where I was, and the tag said it wasn't paid for yet. All I was thinking about during this drive was the break I'd get afterward. Going back and forth for 3 hours straight tired me out more than usual this night. I pulled into the neighborhood and followed the GPS until I got to a back portion where the whole atmosphere quickly changed. I turned down a thin road of cracked pavement and potholes with barely visible small houses on the side, covered by thick bushes and unkempt lawns. When the GPS told me I'd arrived, I stopped the car but didn't see a house. I turned my brights on, and ever so faintly I could see the outline of a small house pretty far from the road I was on. I then looked at the grass leading up to it and realized there was actually a driveway. It was just engulfed in vines and tall grass. I would never have seen it if I hadn't seen the house first. Knowing I would be unable to even drive on it, I put the car in park and got out with the bag, then began to walk through the overgrown driveway. I couldn't believe how awful it was to walk through, and I couldn't imagine anyone letting their driveway get to this point. Getting closer, though, I could see more of the house. It was very small, kind of like a trailer home, and looked to be in a matching condition to the driveway. Vines growing over the windows and bushes covering every inch of the nearly decaying house. As I made my way up to the front door, I knew something was wrong. I knew it in my gut and in my head, but I was just some kid with a first job that was scared to lose it, so I felt like I had to do my job, which was to deliver the order to this address. I pushed all my bad feelings aside and knocked on the door. Right away, I heard footsteps coming up to the door. It opened, revealing a young lady behind it. At first, in the dim lighting, she looked very normal, and I felt a huge relief. But it only took a few more seconds to realize that her normal look was eerily out of place with the house in this condition. There was no way she could be so well dressed and taken care of. As these thoughts scrambled through my head, she opened the screen door and said in a creepily calm tone, "Come in." Everything hit me in that moment as I stumbled back a few steps and decided that I needed to leave right away. I turned around, and only a second after beginning to leave, I heard a thud from the side of the house. I looked over, seeing 2 men running out from behind the house and sprinting through the bushes toward me. I dropped everything and started running. I did everything I could to get through the thick grass and vines, but just as I reached the end of the driveway, I stumbled to the ground, tripping over something. I hurried up, hearing their footsteps closing the distance on me. I couldn't even get myself to look back as I ran straight into my car, turning it on. The men immediately stopped and ran back to where they came from. With my whole body still shaking from the adrenaline, I turned the car around and drove away. Of course, I let my boss know what happened, and he urged me to call the police and report it. I was really relieved to know he didn't care about the order and only for my safety, which, looking back on it, would have been horrible if it were any other way. The police interviewed me and my boss and did a whole investigation, ultimately unable to find any of the people. The property I was on, though, was actually state-owned, and the trespassing sign at the beginning of the road had been dug up and thrown into the tall grass. Their intentions are unknown, but it seems like the most obvious possibility is likely the answer. I just hope nobody else has to go through what I did, or if they do, I hope they can be as lucky as I was to get away.